Okay.
Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senate gavelled in at 10 a.m. this morning for general speeches. The order of business this morning until lawmakers break for party caucus meetings between 12:30 and 2:15 p.m. Eastern. The House today continues the Republican plan of passing targeted short-term spending bills. Today they focus on the Food and Drug Administration. Senator Majority Leader Reid has said this strategy is a non-starter in the Senate. We've yet to hear from Republican leadership on the Senate floor today, but we did hear from House Republican leaders. While we're in this quorum call, we'll bring you those remarks.
You know, Americans expect us to work out our differences. But refusing to negotiate is an untenable position. And frankly, by refusing to negotiate, Harry Reid and the President are putting our country on a pretty dangerous path. Listen, there's never been a president in our history that did not negotiate over the debt limit. Never. Not once. As a matter of fact, President Obama negotiated with me over the debt limit in 2011. He also negotiated with the Blue Dog Democrats to raise the debt ceiling in 2010. So the way to resolve this is to sit down and have a conversation to resolve our differences.
Good morning. You know, in our last effort to fully fund the government, we asked for an end to special treatment for Congress. Simple. And we said if you're having a hard time using Obamacare's broken website, you shouldn't be penalized for not signing up this year. Very simple. That's all we were asking for. A one-year delay of that tax is more than fair given how poorly the rollout of Obamacare has been. And President Obama gave the same relief that we're asking for to big business. But the President and Senator Reid wanted to protect that tax. So we asked to sit down and talk, and they said no. In a divided government, the American people expect us to work together. Whether it's on the government's funding or the debt limit, people expect to have negotiations when there are two differing sides. In 1995, both sides sat down together under the same type of circumstances, and they ended up balancing the budget. In 2011, as the Speaker just said, we all sat down together, and now we'll have 2 consecutive years of reduced spending as a result. Never negotiating, a position of not negotiating, is not a sustainable option, and we ask this President and Harry Reid to sit down and let's iron out our differences.
You're going to hear a similar tone from everybody that's up here because it's very simple. Get into a room and solve our problems. The President made a decision not to go to Asia. We stayed in Washington. A perfect opportunity to communicate with one another. Another weekend missed. Another opportunity missed. I don't want America to miss any more opportunities. It's very simple. Harry Reid, come to the room. We're there. Mr. President, give a call. We're ready to answer.
So we're 1 week into this shutdown, and I think most Americans are looking at us wondering, why can't we just negotiate? Why can't they just sit down and have a conversation, have a dialogue about the way forward? That's what most people do in their own homes. Each one of us have been in those situations, and you have to sit down and at least open up the lines of communication. And that is what we are asking for the Senate Democrats, and the President to do. We have been working in the House. We sent over 4 bills that completely funded the government. And as people know, the Senate rejected every single one of those proposals. Now we've sent over 8 bills that keep critical portions of the federal government open. Nearly half of the federal government now, we have passed the bills in the House to open up the federal government, and yet the Senate refuses to act. That is not leadership. Leadership is when you say you're not going to negotiate, that's not leadership. Or you say that they're just holding the United States hostage. That's not leadership. And leadership is certainly not when you're not willing to address the big issues, the major issues that face the country. We are elected to govern. We're elected to make the tough decisions. And yet the President and the Senate Democrats want to take the easy way out. That's not acceptable to us, and that's not acceptable to the American people.
I've been reminded the last few weeks about Albert Einstein's definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. The only thing more irresponsible or insane than the President letting us default on our debt would be the President's demand that we increase the federal debt ceiling without addressing our nation's spending problem. This nation's spending addiction has finally caught up with us. Today, each one of us owes over $53,000 in federal debt. This is not sustainable, and we need to start addressing it now. If we don't start now, when will we ever address our debt? When it hits $18 trillion, $19 trillion, or do we wait until our economy totally collapses? The American people expect more from their leaders, and it's time both parties sat down and had a conversation, work out our difference, and find a responsible way forward.
When you say you want a negotiation, is there a particular dollar amount in debt reduction you're looking for? Last time you got $1.2 trillion worth. Is that your goal this time?
The last time the President and I sat down, it was actually $2.4 trillion worth of reductions over 10 years. I want to have a conversation. I'm not drawing any lines in the sand. It's time for us to just sit down and resolve our differences.
Lift the debt ceiling and fund the government fully for a short amount of time before
I'm not going to get into a whole lot of speculation.
Well, that's the central argument. That
no, it isn't. The central argument is this. Are we going to sit down and have a conversation, or aren't we?
We haven't heard many details about what a possible debt ceiling package might look like coming from the House Republicans. I know you say you want to have a conversation with the President. But are we not hearing any of these details because there have been two previous bills related to the debt ceiling, related to the CR, that you guys had to pull off the floor because of internal squabbles in the conference? Is there concern about that getting out there and then that spiraling the markets out of control?
All we're asking for is to sit down and have this conversation. There's no reason to make it more difficult to bring people to the table. And so there's no boundaries here. There's nothing on the table. There's nothing off the table. I'm trying to do everything I can to bring people together and to have a conversation. Yes, ma'am.
Should Secretary Sebelius be fired or asked to resign after the court starts with the Obamacare launch website?
Well, that's a decision for the President to make.
Keenan's vote has 217. Keenan's vote tally has 217 votes for the bill.
We're in day 8 of the government shutdown. Senate's in session this morning with general speeches. They're the order of business this morning until lawmakers break for their party caucus meetings between 12:30 and 2:15 p.m. Eastern. The House today continues the Republican plan of passing targeted short-term spending bills. Today they focus on the Food and Drug Administration. Senate Majority Leader Reid has said this strategy is a non-starter in the Senate. While the Senate remains in this quorum call, we'll show you a piece of this morning's Washington Journal. The acting president of the National Parks Conservation Association, Teresa Pierno, talks about the effects of the government shutdown on national parks.
Joining us at our table is Teresa Pierno. She's the acting president of the National Parks Conservation Association, here to talk about the impact of the government shutdown on national parks. Welcome. Let me just begin with your group, what you do, and how it differs from the National Park Service.
Thank you. Well, we're the National Park Conservation Association, as you said, and we've been in existence for almost 100 years. In 2019, we'll celebrate our centennial, and we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan conservation organization that are really dedicated to protecting our national parks. And so we're non-governmental. While we don't have control over the national parks, we do have the ability to protect them and advocate on their behalf.
So that's important to note for our viewers. You don't have control over the national parks, but you can speak to the impact of the government shutdown on the parks. What is it so far? We are in day 8.
Well, it's a really just incredibly awful situation. As you know, and many of your viewers know, the national parks have been suffering from underfunding for several years. And with the sequester, we've been seeing park closures, late openings, really throughout this year. In fact, I think a great example is Acadia National Park. Normally they open in April, mid-April. They're Loop Road, and it's an important part of the season for them. This year, because of the sequester cuts, they weren't able to open until mid-May. So just local businesses alone lost about $30 million in revenue. So now to see another season, the shoulder season, which is so important, Many people remember the government shutdown last time. Well, this time it's even much worse because this is peak season for so many of the national parks. So whether it's weddings, vacations, whether it's concessionaires losing millions of dollars a day, this is an incredible hit for our local communities and for those that depend on the national parks.
If you go to the NPCA's website, npca.org, you can see what we showed you, the running ticker of the cost of the park shutdown to the local park economies. There's also a Flickr page we can show you that your group put together with photos of the shutdown at different parks. So according to the National Park Service, 401 national park sites are closed under this partial government shutdown. Over 20,000 furloughed staff, 3,000 staff deemed essential, 715,000 park visitors per day turned away, 450,000 in lost federal revenue per day, 300,000 in lost entrance fees, 150,000 in other lost spending. On the 715,000 park visitors turned away, who makes that decision of how and why they're turned away?
Well, under the federal shutdown, the government shutdown, I mean, Congress basically has shut down the federal government. And so what that has caused is all of the national parks must close their doors. As you can imagine, the National Park Service is responsible for the protection of our national parks and public safety. And so when they have to furlough about 85% of their workers, they don't have the staff to keep the parks open and to maintain them, to provide the kind of public safety and assurances that people that are visiting the parks can count on. So all of the 401 national parks then are required to close.
The National Park Service Director, Jonathan Jarvis, joined us on the phone here on the Washington Journal last week, and he talked about the decision to allow veterans access to the World War II Memorial after they were not allowed to see the memorial. Let's play that and have you respond.
It is open to veterans that are arriving on the honor flights as a part of First Amendment activities. We made the decision in the closure of the 401 national parks across the country that we would still honor First Amendment activities on the National Mall, on the Ellipse, and on the grounds at Independence in Philadelphia, because these are probably the most important sites for the exercise of the First Amendment of the Constitution, and particularly in these sort of troubling times. American citizens want to exercise that right, so we needed to respect that. We have recognized that these honor flights for our World War II veterans are basically exercising their First Amendment, so we're allowing them in. But other than that, the memorial as well as the other monuments are closed.
Teresa Perino, what about his explanation there?
Well, I think that was so important, and we were so pleased to be able to see them do that. And of course, that is such a critical, I mean, to have our World War II vets come into Washington, D.C. for a lifetime visit, to be able to see the very memorial that honored their service and not to be able to get in is just outrageous. So the fact that they were able to do that and dedicate the kinds of support and services they needed to be able to open that, I thought that that was a great thing.
What's the difference between that group, though, and any tourist who's exercising their rights under the Constitution to go see a memorial?
It's a huge challenge and difficult decisions every day that I'm sure the Park Service is making. But when you have to furlough 85% of your staff, they just can't physically open all the monuments and all of the national parks across the country without the federal government opening. And as you recall, the parks have already been underfunded. The sequester hit very hard. They got 13% budget cuts for the last few years. So they're already dealing with less staff and more difficulty in managing the national parks. So then when you add a federal closure, how can they possibly open the national parks across the country?
Let's hear what Congressman Mark Sanford had to say, a Republican of South Carolina. He was on the floor recently talking about this shutdown, this go-around, compared to the last time.
But it turns out there's some things that I didn't know about the Lincoln Memorial in this shot. I'd become so agitated that I'd asked a tourist to take a picture, and it's an amazing picture of again, the Lincoln Memorial without people. Because what I have come to learn is it has always been a place with people. I didn't realize that in the last government shutdown, President Clinton elected not to close down the Lincoln Memorial. I didn't realize there have been 17 shutdowns in this country since 1976, and not one president elected to close down the Lincoln Memorial. That means President Ford, President Carter, President Reagan, President Bush, and President Clinton, each when given the discretion in how they would handle a shutdown, chose not to hold Americans hostage in somehow gaining political favor by shutdown that would hurt them on their tour to Washington, D.C. In fact, what I came to learn is that in the history of the American Republic, the Lincoln Memorial has never been shut down. And so my simple question would be why?
Teresa Perno, is that true? This shutdown compared to last, the Lincoln Memorial was not barricaded.
Well, I mean, many of us remember just a few months ago the vandalism that occurred at the Lincoln Memorial. And, you know, as we know that these monuments are susceptible to that kind of action, right now, given that this is post 9/11 and the kinds of barricades that do exist in Washington, D.C., many of the monuments were barricaded because, quite frankly, they can. It was very difficult in prior closings. They didn't have the kind of physical structures that are in place now. But the reality is all of these places should be open. Our national parks need to be open. Our monuments need to be open. The federal government needs to take action, and Congress and the administration to make that happen. You know, we think that it was, you know, a decision that was, I'm sure, a very difficult one, but it's the fact that the federal government does not have, you know, that they haven't approved a budget in many years now, and we're continuing to see these funding impacts.
So the decision does lie with the president, though, on which memorials should be closed and which ones should be open during a government shutdown?
You know, the reality is the National Park Service had to furlough 85% of their staff. So they don't have the staff to manage these incredible resources. Their job is to protect these treasures for all of us and for future generations. And we know that the increased vandalism has already begun across the country in some of the national parks because they don't have the staffing there to protect them. And so it's a difficult decision, but you know, we see vandalism occur even when they are open. So now you take away the kind of support and protection that the Park Service is able to provide, and it's a very difficult choice.
The House last week took a piecemeal approach to opening up the government. One component was to fund the National Park Service. Did you support that legislation?
We need legislation that is going to open up the federal government and that's going to be able to open parks permanently. Not for short term, not just till December, and then we go through this again. The local economies, the gateway communities that depend on the national parks, the vacationers, those that weddings were canceled, people need to have certainty, and we need our national parks open and funded for the long term, not a short-term solution.
We're talking with Teresa Perno. She's the acting president of the National Parks Conservation Association. They are advocates for the National Park Service, but not part of the Park Service. And she'll be taking your questions and comments here, so you can start dialing in now. Jack Hutton on Twitter says National Park employees are some of the most dutiful and polite and hardworking and loyal people you can find. Sarah in California, independent caller. You're up first, Sarah.
Hi. I'm a long-term member of your association. I started working in the national parks in 1991 when I went back to school and discovered the jobs for the concessionaires and continued for a number of seasons. And I love the national parks. But I was very concerned about the disrepair at Mount Rainier and several of the others, and also concerned about the accessibility for handicapped people. And at some point in time, I'd actually like to visit the parks and assess the needs for improvement. How would I go about contacting you for something like that?
Please go to our website. There's contact information at npca.org. Or you can certainly call us in Washington, D.C. at our headquarters. What I would recommend is that you contact your member of Congress, and we really appreciate your membership and support with the National Park Conservation Association. But contact your member of Congress, encourage your friends to do the same, to let them know that national parks deserve to be funded. 90% of Americans in a recent poll said they believe it's a primary federal responsibility to fund the national parks, to make sure that our monuments and our national resources and cultural resources are taken care of. And we expect that as Americans, because these are our treasures. And so I would encourage all of you out there that are listening to please contact your members of Congress. Make sure that they fund our federal government, our national parks for the long term.
That caller said that she is a part of your association. Who belongs to the association? Where do you get your money from?
We have over 800,000 members and supporters from around the country. So we are a nonprofit, non-governmental. We don't receive government funding. We have many foundations and corporate support, but mainly it's through the incredible members like the woman you just heard from around the country.
Kemia's next. Columbus, Ohio, Democratic caller. Kemia? Kemia? One last call for Kemia. Oh, we don't have her, I guess. I want to show viewers this from Juliet Elperin in the Washington Post, published on October 2nd. Park Service rejects the RNC's offer to help reopen the World War II memorial. Why was that rejected?
Well, and I can't speak to every issue because I think, again, the reality is there are 401 national parks and monuments around the country. All of them are very important. And it's very difficult. They have all kinds of security issues, lease, contractual issues, and they have significant now staffing issues with such a skeleton crew. So it's very difficult to speak to every specific one, but what I would say is ultimately the National Park Service found a way to be able to open it at least to the veterans that absolutely deserve to be able to visit a site that is honoring their incredible duty and service to the country.
Bill is up next. Burson, California, independent caller.
Yeah, hi, this is Bill in California, and I'm constituent of a congressman who wants to authorize cutting trees, logging throughout Yosemite National Park. I'm quite concerned about that, and I'd like to ask Ms. Pierno her view on that.
Well, Bill, and thank you for the call. As you know, national parks have some of the highest protection of our public lands in the country, and it's really an outrage when I hear a member of Congress or I hear anybody suggest that these very treasures that have been laid down to be protected for all of us, for our grandchildren and future generations, would consider going in and creating a havoc and the damage. Anybody that has spent a moment in Yosemite Valley or has seen the incredible majesty of that place understands the value and what that does to your soul. And so to think that somebody would suggest to go in there and do logging and impact that area is just you know, incomprehensible. And I would suggest that all of you, again, make sure that you reach out to your representatives and let them know how important the national parks are.
Denise in Evansville, Indiana, Democratic caller.
Yes, I'm calling because I wanted to say, first of all, I appreciate that Ms. Pierno, is it Pierno?
Yes.
That she said that she wants the government to get back to their jobs and actually pass their bill that they're supposed to for the long term, not just for these little bitty bills that they're trying to pass. I think it's really disturbing that the Republicans are just trying to pass these small bills to put bandages on a bigger problem. And the problem is that their job is to go in there. They're supposed to pass a budget, and then they're supposed to get their job done. I understand that they want to do this Obamacare thing, which is really called the Affordable Care Act, and put it in there. But that has nothing to do with the budget. And I think that the longer they stay out and just keep trying to pass these small bandages on this big gaping hole in our economy, it's going to make it worse. And more people need to stand up and say, hey, we need to get back in there and do our job. Because I know that if I went into work and I said to my boss, I can't pass the budget that we need for all of our employees, they're going to say, we need to get you out of here. And so I just appreciate Ms. Pierno for what she has said and standing up for her ground. I know it can't be that hard to do that.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. And you know, I will say that national parks are totally a nonpartisan issue. When polled across the country, Republicans, Democrats, Independents alike think that they should be a top priority for our country. And I know that the Republicans have a long history of supporting our national parks from Teddy Roosevelt all the way through. So it's not a partisan issue. Republicans and Democrats alike love our national parks, and we need to get our country moving again, and we need the federal government open so that they can be open to the public.
Carrie in Florida, Republican caller. Carrie, where are you calling from?
Yes, ma'am. I'm calling from Apalachicola, Florida, and
Okay.
I am a Republican, but I strongly disagree with the Republican Party on this issue. I think they're all going to lead the country over a cliff, and to give a little here and a little there ain't right. Go ahead and do your job and pass a budget. Quit playing games with the American people and hold them hostage. And because of this situation, I have now
permission to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I request permission to speak for up to 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to address the negative impact that this government shutdown is having on my home state of North Carolina. It is a shame that some in Congress are playing political games with the most basic function of keeping our government open. I didn't get elected to shut down the government, and with each minute that goes by, more and more North Carolinians are feeling the impact of this irresponsible shutdown. Mr. President, North Carolina is proud to be home to almost 1 million veterans. But as of this spring, we are also home to one of the worst VA disability claims backlogs in the country. We've pushed to have senior VA personnel be dispatched to North Carolina, and more caseworkers have been added. And after a lot of attention and work, we were finally beginning to see the needle move in the right direction. Claims were being processed faster, which means veterans were getting the benefits they deserve faster. But as of today, the Winston-Salem Regional Office is closed to the public. And with claims processors furloughed and just a skeleton staff operating inside, this government shutdown threatens to reverse the progress we have made in addressing that backlog. So I ask, is it worth shutting down the government over a political game when veterans get caught in this crossfire? No. In my home state, we're also proud to have 11 national parks that are not simply just beautiful places in our country and in our state, but also important drivers of our tourism economy. As families flock to enjoy these affordable destinations, they stop at our local small businesses, they eat at our restaurants, and they stay in our hotels. In 2011, out-of-state tourists to national parks in North Carolina spent $720 million during these trips, which supported nearly 12,000 jobs. I don't know how many of my colleagues have been fortunate enough to visit western North Carolina at this time of the year, but right now the fall leaves are turning and western North Carolina is opening its arms to welcome tourists from around the country and from around the world who come to see this beautiful landscape. And on the other side of the state, in the east, we have Cape Hatteras National Seashore, Cape Lookout. They're both closed. October is the most popular surf fishing month of the year, but with beach access closed, our fishermen cannot get to the fishing areas. With parks from out west all the way to down east closed, we fear that too many families will decide to cancel their vacations. So I ask, is it worth shutting down the government over a political game when our small business owners who support our economy, they will be the ones to shoulder this burden? No. In my home state, we are proud that our university system includes a number of distinguished research institutions that are on the cutting edge of new technologies and therapies that will make our world better. NIH supports roughly 20,000 jobs in North Carolina, but the NIH will not take any actions on grant applications or awards or admit new patients to clinical trials while our government is shut down. So I ask, is it worth putting medical advances and thousands of jobs at risk just to play a tired political game? No. I could go on and on. While flu vaccines are still being delivered, the CDC is not able to track flu cases as usual, and they can't support state and local partners who help monitor infectious diseases. The FDA is not able to support the majority of its food safety activities. Pell Grants and direct student loans could be delayed for 14 million American students. School districts, colleges, and job training centers could face major cash flow problems without money for federal programs and grants coming in the door. Our research universities, in addition to doing this cutting-edge research that benefits our entire country, are huge employers. Some of them receive tens of millions of dollars a month in reimbursements for work already performed for the federal government. Without those funds coming in the door, these universities can be put in an incredibly difficult position with respect to managing their expenses. And then not to mention the time lost here in Congress. We should be talking about how to continue repairing our economy. We should be talking about how to improve job training programs. We should be talking about growing manufacturing in our country. But instead, we are just manufacturing crisis after crisis after another. There is no reason we can't end this shutdown. And fortunately, there is a simple solution. The Senate has passed a responsible bill that keeps the government running at currently reduced spending levels. The House of Representatives could pass that bill today, and this shutdown could end within a matter of hours. Then we could have the time and space to come together on a long-term, balanced, and bipartisan plan to finally put our fiscal house in order. Instead, the other side of the Capitol insists on sending us bills that they know have zero chance of passing, of becoming law over here, just to stage a political stunt. But political stunts won't process VA claims. Political stunts won't help restaurant owners in western North Carolina make payroll while the national parks are closed. And political stunts won't get this government opened back up for business. I urge my colleagues in the House of Representatives to stop playing this partisan game. Take up the Senate-passed bill, end this government shutdown. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Alexander.
Busy day in Washington this morning. The Senate gavelled in at 10 a.m. for general speeches. They'll continue those until lawmakers break for party caucus meetings between 12:30 and 2:15 p.m. Eastern. Also some news for you. The Oklahoman newspapers reporting today that Oklahoma Republican Senator Jim Inhofe underwent emergency heart surgery last Friday. He said, quote, "I feel great. I'm going to be an Olympian." The Senator Inhofe plans to be released from the hospital today, and while he hopes to get back to Washington as soon as possible, it will be a few days before he's permitted to travel in the air. Meanwhile, the House today continues the Republican plan of passing targeted short-term spending bills. Today they focus on money for schools. Senate Majority Leader Reid has said this strategy is a non-starter in the Senate. President Obama once again called the House Speaker this morning around 10:45 Eastern to talk about the fiscal stalemate. Here's how the White House describes that call. Quote, "Late this morning, the President telephoned Speaker John Boehner from the Oval Office and repeated what he had told them when they met at the White House last week. The President is willing to negotiate with Republicans after the threat of government shutdown and defaults have been removed or policies that Republicans think would strengthen the country." The President also repeated his willingness to negotiate on priorities that he has identified, including policies that expand economic opportunity, support private sector job creation, enhance the competitiveness of American businesses, strengthens the Affordable Care Act, and continue to reduce the nation's deficit, unquote. Speaker Boehner's spokesman released this statement, said, quote, "The President called the Speaker again today to reiterate that he won't negotiate on a government funding bill or debt limit increase," unquote. Yesterday, House Republicans passed a bill temporarily funding the Food and Drug Administration. Senator Reid is unlikely to bring that measure to the Senate floor. While we wait for a senator to speak, here's a look at some of the House floor debate from yesterday.
Rise in support of House Joint Res 77, which would continue the funding for the Food and Drug Administration. I think everyone here in the House agrees that funding for the FDA is necessary to this critical operation in order to support our nation's public health and the millions of jobs associated with FDA activities. Most members of this body may not realize it, but the FDA-regulated industries account for just almost 25% of the consumer spending in the United States of America. FY 2013 Ag appropriation included total funding of $4.2 billion. That's $2.5 billion came from discretionary funds and $1.7 billion from user fees. Of greatest importance is the need to ensure that our constituents continue to consume safe foods and use safe and effective drugs and medical devices. Despite reduced funding levels overall for FY 2013, we were able to provide a strategic increase of $12.5 million for food safety activities and $10 million for food and drug safety inspections in China. These funding increases will continue under a CR. In addition to the funds appropriated to for the FDA, this resolution that we're debating this afternoon would allow FDA to collect and spend drug and medical product user fees. Of course, the fees are charged to the industry support such life-saving activities for the review and approval of new and generic drugs as well as medical devices. This House has already passed a resolution to fund the public health activities at the NIH, and it awaits the Senate's approval. Also, USDA meat and poultry inspectors were deemed critical to our nation's food supply and have stayed on duty during this temporary delay in funding. It is now time for this body to continue funding one more critical component of our public health infrastructure. The Food and Drug Administration touches every member of this House, either directly or indirectly, and we need the entire agency back at work. We need to also limit any damage to the millions of jobs impacted by FDA's work in the food and bioscience industries. Now is a chance for my colleagues here in the House to join me in keeping this important program fully operational. I would ask that my colleagues support this resolution that we're debating this afternoon and will ensure that all critical elements of our nation's food and drug supply be protected. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized for 20 minutes.
Speaker, I asked to be recognized for as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague and chair, Mr. Adeholt, just said that this bill is necessary because funding for the FDA is necessary. He's absolutely right. But this bill doesn't do all that. You cannot just fund one component of government and not have the rest of government. FDA is the Food and Drug Administration. It relies heavily on the Center for Disease Control. You do nothing to fund the Center for Disease Control. So, as just one critical component of the federal government, it isn't the federal government, and that's what's been shut down. So I adamantly oppose this legislation. We've been here a number of days now with the government shut down because people are trying to use the appropriations process, which, as every school child knows, is the process where the President asks and then the Congress disposes. And we use the Appropriations Committee to dispose. That is, we make the decisions on how much is going to be spent by each agency. The President came to Congress asking for $1.2 trillion in expenditures. The Republicans rejected that in their budget and came up with a much less budget at $967 billion. This bill on the floor, the big bill, has the Democrats agreeing to $286 billion. That's a $200 billion reduction. That's just amazing. I don't think this has ever been done before where that big of a cut has been made to the federal government. And yet we can't pass it. The Senate has passed it because everyone knows it's a bicameral process and whatever the President signs has to be passed by both houses. The Senate has passed over a bill here, clean, as we say, means without all kinds of conditionality, and that would go to the President if this House had voted for it. He'd go for it tonight.
Without objection.
And I'm going to I ask unanimous consent to extend the period of morning business for debate only until 5 p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, and the majority leader be recognized following morning business.
Without objection.
Madam President.
Senator from New York.
Madam President, I rise today with just 9 days left until the United States hits the debt ceiling. Never before in our history have we failed to pay our bills. But in 9 days, that possibility reaches our doorstep. Even though defaulting on our debt could send our economy into a tailspin, even possibly another Great Depression, there are already those who are denying the impacts of default. The debt ceiling deniers try to claim this won't be a big deal and that middle-class families won't be hurt. Well, Madam President, these debt ceiling deniers need a dose of debt ceiling reality. The truth is, failing to pay our bills on time would most probably be worse than 2008, when Lehman Brothers and AIG went under and the economy went into a tailspin. We still haven't recovered from that debacle. To this day, there are people out of work. There are middle-class families whose income is lower than it was then because of what happened in 2008. Now, why could it be worse? In all likelihood would be worse because just as housing securities had to be marked down because of the Lehman crisis, if government bonds, which are much more widely held, have to be marked down and lower value, we could have a freeze where banks are not able to lend money. What happened, Madam President, in 2008 was simple. Banks and other financial institutions had all these mortgage securities on their balance sheets. All of a sudden, their value seemed to be a lot less. so the bank balance sheets were in the red. That meant they couldn't lend money, not just for long-term mortgages and car loans, but also for overnight lines of credit. Businesses were shaken up. Many businesses couldn't function. Wire transfers weren't allowed to be made, and the whole financial system came to a startling and devastating halt. Now, the effects would be worse, in all likelihood, for this reason. Mortgage securities were widely held, but not close to as widely held as U.S. Treasuries are. Can you imagine, on the day of default, or, God forbid, even a day or two before default, all of a sudden the markets determine, and they are mystical in some way, that Treasuries should be written down significantly? It could, very real possibility, not 5%, significantly higher than that. I'd estimated 30, 40, 50% chance of sending us into a tailspin that might make the 2008 recession look like child's play. And how would it affect the average family? Well, if the U.S. defaults, middle-class families' paychecks will be rated by higher interest rates on everyday expenses. Already, interest rates on short-term Treasury bonds are creeping upward as the possibility of default looms over us. If we default, investors who are always considered U.S. debt-free risk will demand higher interest rates due to the heightened risk that they might not be paid. For the first time ever, investors question whether the U.S. government would honor its commitments. The domino effect on interest rates that affect families' budgets would be endless, and it would be cataclysmic. Credit card interest rates goes up, adding hundreds of dollars to monthly bills. Young families seeking to take out a mortgage on a new home would be faced with thousands of dollars in higher payments over the life of the mortgage. Many might not even buy that home, putting a crimp in one of the bright spots of our economy, the housing market. Want to take out a loan to buy a new car? Prepare to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars more in higher interest rates, so car sales would decline. Automobile manufacturers could lay off people. Do you have privately held student loans? Prepare for monthly payments to shoot upward. Innocent families, millions of them, tens of millions, would be hit with thousands of dollars in additional bills through no fault of their own if U.S. Treasuries are devalued. And the damage doesn't stop there. If we default on our debt, the dollar loses value, a trip to the gas station or the grocery store gets more expensive. The dollar won't go as far. Americans will have to shell out more for gas, for milk, to feed their kids. Think of the effect of default on 10,000 baby boomers who are retiring each day. In 2011, the stock market lost 2,000 points. How much more might it lose now? We gained that back by the beginning of 2012, but that's no comfort to the thousands of people retiring every day. And when you're dealing with U.S. Treasuries, and these are not certainties, but these are possibilities, it could be a lot worse. They went to check you could check your 401k and see that political brinksmanship took a huge bite out of your retirement savings. Imagine the pain of saving wisely, making smart choices, only to have your retirement account and family budget wrecked by dangerous brinksmanship from Tea Party Republicans in Washington. If there were ever a governmental action that merited the words "playing with fire," this is it. And the devastation doesn't with impossible choices. Do we pay foreign benefits, foreign debts? Because if we don't, those countries won't lend to us anymore. Or do we pay veterans benefits? Do we make sure Social Security benefits go out? Or Medicare? Do we pay our troops? Do we fund border security? Or do we pay for education? These are all tough, tough choices. Make no mistake about it. If the debt ceiling is not lifted, we can't meet all our obligations. So, Madam President, the chances of this are not 80%, but they're close enough to 50, that anyone who risks this, particularly for this forlorn goal, we won't raise the debt ceiling unless we repeal Obamacare, which we know isn't happening, is madness. Risk the economy of the United States? the possibility of going through worse than what we went through in 2008 because you demand Obamacare be repealed when you know it won't happen? Wow. I have rarely seen such madness coming out of legislators, but it is coming out of a few. So the consequences, Madam President, of failing to raise the debt ceiling are crystal clear. Interest rates on middle-class expenses like home mortgages, car loans, and student loans shoot up. Housing markets, automobile markets, and others decline. Many are laid off. And then others are laid off in a cyclical cycle, as most cycles are. The dollar will lose its value, making everyday purchases more expensive, and the federal government faces terrible choices about who to pay: seniors, veterans, military, creditors. To risk these consequences would be a terrible mistake. So in conclusion, Madam President, I come here with a simple plea, not to our Tea Party activist colleagues, but to mainstream conservative Republican friends. Please, help us avoid the default crash. Please, help us avoid an economic apocalypse. We're ready to talk. We're ready to negotiate on anything you want, but first, open up the government and pay our bills. Then we can sit down and debate our differences. The future of our financial system, the future of millions of Americans is at stake. You don't play around with that. You don't hold that hostage. So to my mainstream conservative Republican colleagues, please do the right thing. Let us pay our bills and take the threat of a severe economic collapse off the table now. I yield the floor.
Madam President. The Senator from Maryland.
Madam President, I rise to speak as the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, who really would like to be able to reopen government and for our committee to get back to regular order, to be able to move our appropriations bills, to be able to debate them on the floor, amend them on the floor, and go to the conference to resolve either fiscal or other issues we might have with the House. But we can't do it because we are in lockdown politics. Now, one of the things, there's many things about where we find ourselves that are very frustrating to me. And one of the main ones is the fact that the Tea Party Republicans are just out there saying things that simply are not accurate. Tea Party Republicans say that President Obama won't negotiate. That's not true. Tea Party Republicans are saying Democrats in the Senate won't negotiate. That's not true. Tea Party Republicans say that the Senate has not moved appropriations bills. The Appropriations Committee has. That's not true. Tea Party Republicans say the House doesn't have the votes to reopen the government. That's not true. And Tea Party Republicans say the debt limit is not a big deal. That's not true. So let me elaborate on these point by point. Tea Party Republicans say President Obama won't negotiate. The president has negotiated time and time and time and time again. He had a framework for a grand bargain in his 2014 budget. Read it. Let the print speak for itself. He had $1.8 trillion of deficit reduction over 10 years, including $400 billion in health care savings, $200 billion in savings from mandatory programs, $200 billion of further discretionary cuts, strategic funding and discretionary spending. And yes, he would even change the cost of living calculation for Social Security. But the Republicans couldn't take yes for an answer. Here was Obama. Here was his budget. Here's what he was offering: to reduce debt, to take on mandatory spending, to take on discretionary spending. They couldn't take yes for an answer. It included things in there I didn't agree with, but it was an offer to be negotiated, to be discussed. Since he became president, The deficit has gone down by 50%, from $1.4 trillion in 2009 to an estimated $700 billion in 2013. High? Yes, but cut in half. Now let's go to this president who they say won't negotiate. He negotiated in 2012 in December on a fiscal cliff deal. He wanted a 2-year delay in sequester, but we got 2 months. He wanted tax cuts for the wealthy to be eliminated above $250,000. He agreed to an estate tax exemption. He agreed with he wanted a $3.5 million exemption. The Republicans wanted $5 million. He said, okay. The 2% Social Security payroll tax was ended without offsetting stimulus provisions. He gave and we supported him. Now let's say he won't negotiate. Speaker Boehner says, we just want to have a conversation. Well, he just wants to have a conversation. That's what the president did. What were those golf summits at Andrews Air Force Base? I thought that was going to be kumbaya. The president has had private one-on-one meetings, and nothing has come about it. Then he did a larger charm offensive. He had dinner with Republicans both at the White House and at different restaurants around town. Nobody seemed to be able to take yes for an answer. This is a president who's invited people at the White House, invited leadership to play golf with them, to build relationships. He's had dinner there, but instead of having lunch with the president, they want to have his lunch. Over and over again. So the president has expressed a willingness continually to negotiate. And where are we now? We need to reopen the government. The House needs to pass the Senate clean short-term CR, raise the debt limit. Once it's open for business, we can talk about other matters. Now let's go to Tea Party Republicans saying Democrats won't negotiate. Senate Democrats have tried to negotiate on the budget since we passed it on March 23rd, 23. We were here for a marathon session led by Senator Murray, vote after vote, amendment after amendment, and we passed a budget resolution. We passed a budget resolution. Now, the rules of engagement and the rules for dispute resolution in the United States Congress is you take what one body passes, like the Senate, and you meet with the House in a conference. Senator Murray was ready to go. She asked permission, which you have to do under the rules of the Senate, to go to have her budget conference to hammer out the budget with Paul Ryan and other House members. 19 times since March 23rd, Senator Murray has stood on this floor and asked for the ability to go negotiate with the House. 19 times she was blocked by 6 Tea Party Republicans. 19 times using the rules to protect the voice of the minority, which I understand. They used not only their voice, but what was used to protect them to prohibit the Senate from going meet with their House counterparts. So the Senate, once the Senate Democrats wanted to go negotiate. There's Paul Ryan, there's Patty Murray, let's have a budget conference and hammer it out. The Democrats have been ready to negotiate on a budget since March 23rd, 2013. What do you mean? Let's just have a conversation. We've been trying to have that conversation since March. Who has stopped us? Harry Reid didn't stop Patty Murray. Chuck Schumer didn't stop the Budget Committee. The House leadership, Barbara Mikulski's not stopping. 6 Tea Party Republicans have stopped the ability of the United States Senate to go to the House to negotiate a budget. Free the Budget Committee. Free the Budget Committee. Why is that so important? Because they not only come up with an overall budget in discretionary spending, mandatory spending, and revenues, but they put a cap on reappropriators. One of the things that comes out of a budget agreement is they set the total number, the total amount of money that the Appropriations Committee can spend on discretionary spending. To the shock of everybody, there is actually a cap on discretionary spending established by the Budget Committee. That's been the rule of the Budget Act going back since the 1970s. I would accept the cap that would be agreed upon on a duly constituted process established by the rules of the House and the Senate, which is you pass a budget, you meet in conference, you come back, you give the appropriators their, what they call the 302A, the total cap that we can spend. We take a look at it and we meet, we follow the law. It also says what revenue should be and mandatory spending. So when you hear Democrats won't negotiate, the Democrats have negotiated. Now, going into this situation where we knew that the fiscal year expires October 1st, the Senate put forth a bill. It came out of the Appropriations Committee. It was really, as the chair, my suggestion that we would have a short-term funding resolution so we could deal with issues like debt limit, canceling sequester for 2 years, and what our funding should be, the cap should be for 2014. Short-term, no new money, but a goal of getting us to canceling the sequester, following that the Budget Committee would set the cap on us, et cetera. In order to get there, I was willing to compromise. I didn't want to. I felt it was too harsh, too rough on important discretionary spending. But you know what? Sometimes you got to negotiate and you got to compromise. So I was willing to compromise in order to get to negotiation. What was the compromise? The House has a level of $986 billion. It follows fiscal 13 at the sequester level, meaning reduced by over $100 billion. I thought the 986 was too low. The Senate bill was $1.058 trillion. So that's over a $70 billion difference. But you know what? That's what a conference is. That's what negotiation is. So in order to get us across the dome into negotiation, I was willing to compromise, particularly on very important domestic spending. The liberals who want Head Start, who want to fund NIH, well, maybe we're not liberals. Maybe we're just Americans. And I believe friends on the other side of the aisle, we were ready to go. So in my mind, as an appropriator, I've already compromised just to get us into the room. But they won't even take up that bill. They won't take up the bill that Speaker Boehner said he would pass if we agreed to the $986 billion, their number, to get us into the room to talk. So if you tell the Senate, if you agree with us on this, just to get a short-term negotiation going, we'll pass it, and then you don't, why should we believe that they'll be any different? But I want you to know, as the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, I am ready to negotiate. I am ready to compromise. I have reached out to my House counterpart, the chair of the Appropriations. We have a marvelous, civil, candid relationship. We're ready to go to work. We differ on money. There's no doubt. The chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, Congressman Hal Rogers, a wonderful gentleman, but I will tell you, he is a rock-ribbed no-nonsense fiscal conservative. But that's okay by Senator Barb, because you know what? That's what compromise is. That's doing what Colin Powell asked us to do. Let's talk things over. Let's find that sensible center. Let's make sure we run the United States government in a smart, frugal, effective way. That's what it would take. And you know what? We're ready to do it. But I need Speaker Boehner to pass the short-term CR so we can even get into the room to do this. So when you say Senate Democrats won't negotiate or won't compromise, it's not true. Also, I heard the junior senator from Kentucky say that the Senate hasn't approved appropriations bills. The Appropriations Committee, despite being hamstrung by not having a budget, reported 11 appropriations bills. 8 of them were supported by Republicans. By August 1st, our Appropriations Committee had marked up every single bill except one, Interior. We had marked it up with bipartisan support. 8 of them had bipartisan support. 3 did not: Labor, HHS, Financial Services, and Ledge Grants. Why didn't we get that? Because Labor, HHS, and Financial Services play a role in funding Obamacare. There we go again. Don't do anything that would fund Obamacare. There we go again. Madam President, I'm so fed up with those riders, those poison pen riders. You know, we could have done that here to them. We chose not to. We chose not to. You know, I would like to see the comprehensive immigration bill passed. I didn't put any riders on the appropriation bills coming out of the Senate. I would have liked to have seen a farm bill that has been worked on so hard by Senator Stabenow, the gentlelady from Michigan, and Senator Roberts, the gentleman from Kansas. They've worked wonderfully on a bipartisan farm bill. It was something really to be proud of in the Senate. I would have liked to have attached that to the appropriation. But we decided no riders, nothing cute, nothing clever, no closet earmarks, nothing like that, straightforward money bills ready to go to conference. Well, we couldn't get it, but they are passed. They are passed in the Appropriations Committee, and we are waiting to get to work. So I'm going to conclude by saying this. The Tea Party Republicans say they don't have the votes in the House to reopen government. Give it a chance. Put the vote to the floor. If we win, government's reopened. If we lose, at least we offered a suggestion and back to the drawing board. But the solution to reopening the government lies on Speaker Boehner's desk. He says he wants to have a conversation. We say, pick it up, have the vote that puts the conversation into work on the short-term funding resolution. And we say to our 6 Republican senators that have blocked the Budget Committee, let the Budget Committee go to conference. Let Senator Patty Murray and Congressman Paul Ryan meet to resolve these issues. Let's follow a regular order. Let's getting back to the way government and this country should function. Madam President, I think I've made my points. I now yield the floor and no